Welcome back to another episode of Consciously Clueless. I'm your host, Carly, and here we break down complex issues around health, the climate crisis, and social justice through a vegan lens. We'll talk about the magic link between your well being and the planet's health because luckily, choosing a healthier, mindful lifestyle for yourself often creates healthier vibes for our planet too. Staying consciously clueless means getting to show up knowing nothing, but staying open to all that you can learn. From feasting on plant-based meals and reducing waste to learning to meditate, every step you take contributes to your wellness and makes systematic change for the world. You can make a difference. This podcast will show you how.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So I connected with you through your work for Mercy for Animals. So let's start there and your journey into that, and we'll branch off from there.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, so this is such a fun question to answer. So looking back, it's wild to me that I'm even in the position that I'm in, but it also makes a lot of sense. So there have been two major shifts that kind of pointed me to the work that resonates with me. And the first one was while I was pursuing a bachelor's degree, it was as a stepping stone to become a physical therapist. I realized that while that was a very important and necessary role, and especially helping people, but it was reactive or responsive because it's helping people rehab after surgery. And again, very needed, very necessary and important. But at the same time, in my coursework, I was also learning about more preventative and lifestyle medicine. I was learning through yoga teacher training, just being more active and preventative in that way. And so I learned about the power of those things, which really excited me more so than the reactive. And so that was the first shift. And then the second one was throughout college, I was also working as a lifeguard in the summer. So I had some first aid, first responder experience. And then I took that once I graduated college and went into 911 emergency dispatching. And
Wow.
so pretty big, intense job. It's 6 months on the job training. Our dispatch, we did fire, police, and EMS. So a lot of experience there. But again, you are a first responder. So you're responding to problems, which again is very needed, very necessary, but you're not really preventing any of the problems. And so that was going on. And around that time, I was listening to Rich Roll's podcast, actually. And I came across Milo Runkle's interview, which I think is archived under Nathan Runkle. And that's what introduced me to the organization or Mercy for Animals as an organization. And it was through his podcast that I realized that it's possible to find a job and work in alignment with my values and make the change I see in the world. And so that was really powerful for me. And then later on, I also came across our current president, Leah Garces. She did an interview with Rich Roll as well. And she was discussing her book, Grilled, Turning Adversaries into Allies in the Chicken Industry. And there were a couple things that she said or talked about in her book and in her podcast that really resonated with me. And the first one was just she realized that her purpose was to reduce suffering in the world. And I very much resonated with that.
Yes.
And she also highlighted the power of unlikely allies against oppressive systems instead of against each other. That really resonated as well. Yep. And then also just the importance of recognizing oppression wherever it exists. And the concept that it's no surprise that an industry that exploits animals is also heavily exploitative to the humans who function and work within it. And that was specifically speaking to the contract farming system. And so when I listened to that, I had gone on the website for Mercy for Animals and for Transformation. I saw their job board. I think at the time Transformation was brand new, saw their brand new website. And I just kept tabs on that website, knowing that, I might be able to work in this area. And I do believe, I think Leah founded Transformation. It was late 2019. And that was again after seeing just the firsthand experience of the impacts of contract farming on just the farmers and the rural communities, but also seeing the potential for them to pursue just an alternative form of agriculture that was better for them, the environment, and the animals. And I think it was late 2022, I saw the listing for the Transformation Midwest Coordinator, which is my current role. And I applied for it, and that's how I'm here.
I love that you were listening to a podcast and you were like, that's inspiring. I should do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've very much resonated with both Milo and Leah. Hmm.
So you were vegan already while listening to the Rich Roll podcast. What was that journey?
Yeah, and I can step a little bit further back as on my vegan journey if you'd like.
Totally, please do.
Um, yeah, I really feel like it started thanks to my parents. I grew up surrounded by animals.
Mm.
So it was primarily we had rescued cats, rescued dogs. I think we also had some gerbils, hamsters, and later on some horses. So a wide variety. But my mom is an avid cat lover, and I knew that if I would find a stray cat and I could bring it home and ask forgiveness instead of permission, and it would generally be okay and become part of our family. And so this really gave me the chance to connect with animals and foster a deep love for them, and
Hmm.
especially cats. I am a cat person. I do have five of my own, and I take care of community cats in addition to that. So continuing to foster the love there. And
I love
then when
that.
I
I also have a mom who very much was like, "Oh, whoops, I guess we just have to bring this dog home. We'll see what happens. Let's just do it."
Yep, absolutely. That's the best too. I was like, shout out to the parents that support our love for animals.
Really, truly.
Yeah. And then later on, when I went to college, so I went to a progressive Catholic college, and that was when I was pursuing my bachelor's degree for health and exercise science. And the patron saint for this college was St. Francis of Assisi. And that's the saint over the animals, the environment, and also birds. And our coursework really reflected that. So I got to take some environmental courses. And then there was a course I took because it sounded interesting called Religions, Peace, and Violence. And
Wow.
that was, yeah, it was taught by a nun as well. So that was really cool because some of the professors were nuns. And so that really touched on the intersection of spirituality and nonviolence, which is something I'd not really like thought of before. And
Mm-hmm.
again, at the same time in college, I was doing that yoga teacher training and I learned about yoga philosophy. So this really just primed my consciousness and my awareness of how we interact with our environment and also with animals. I was not quite yet vegan there, but it did prime that awareness. And then, so around 2018, 2019, I like to joke that Netflix made me vegan because
Yeah, I don't think you're alone in that.
because again, I had all that priming from my childhood, from my college experience. And I was working shift work as a dispatcher. So I was
Mm-hmm.
second or third shift. So sometimes to stay awake, that's what you do is Netflix binges. And
Mm-hmm.
all these documentaries that were focusing on aspects of our food system. So touching on animal welfare, touching on what eating animals does to our health and the environment. So one of the most impactful ones, I think there were so many, so I struggle to remember the names, but I think it was Earthlings. I think that was the one that was out at that time, and I think it's a really important one for people to watch. I
Mm-hmm.
also don't think I could ever watch it again because it made me feel very physically ill, just because I just seeing the suffering and what we do to animals was really difficult. I do remember that being one of the most impactful ones. And then I think some like health aspect ones, there was like plant pure nation and in defense of
Mm-hmm.
food, which I think that one might have featured is Michael Pollan. So I know there were a couple of those there, but what all these documentaries really did was it gave me a clear path to align my actions with my values. So I had
Yeah.
all the nonviolence, the compassion, and then also like the integrity of aligning the two. I found that was really encompassed in veganism. So that really helped me. Netflix made me vegan and it happened overnight because of all those things.
I feel like
Yeah.
so you went vegan and then as you're learning and growing within that, listening to the Rich Roll podcast, etc., you're like, wow, I want to do this work. I actually want to make this the work I'm doing in the world. Were you drawn to the transformation project itself? Because there's a lot that Mercy for Animals does. Was that like a thing you were really drawn to? And could you tell us a little bit about that as well?
Yeah. So I think some of that comes to there's a couple things. So in my personal life, when I started becoming vegan, it really became a tension point with some family members or some close people in my life. And it was so weird because it was like I'm just against animal cruelty. So that was it was like, why are people so upset by this? And some of them were also in some of the animal agriculture or agriculture community. So
Oh
pitted
yeah, you're in the
out there.
Midwest.
Yes, we're in the
Yeah.
Midwest.
I'm in Minnesota,
So
yeah.
yeah, it's very unusual. It's very different. And I remember the first experience I had with that. I was just so dumbfounded because I was like, I don't I don't understand why this is happening. I just care about animals, and I'm just choosing not to eat them. It wasn't even like telling anybody else not to. It was just what I was doing in the world. And so that was one of the things that really drew me to Leah's work and transformation, was the concept of working with people who we are pitted against each other, but the problem is the system itself. And so that really drew me to transformation. And I think also, speaking of being more proactive in things, and the whole purpose of transformation is to create an alternative system, because we recognize the system isn't broken. Our food system isn't broken. It's functioning exactly the way it's meant to, which is to value profit above all else. It exploits animals, it exploits the farmers in it, especially the contract system, and the environment. And so the ability to actually play a role in creating something new really excited me.
That has been intriguing to me for a while, which is so exciting. Why I'm so excited to talk to you, because there is, I swear, I think I've said this before on the podcast, but there must be like a vegan troll pamphlet that's going around with the same 10 ChatGPT responses that I get on some of my content. But there is some of that. Oh, so you hate farmers and you want this industry XYZ, right? That's the narrative, like you said, pitted against each other. So what is transformation doing, and how is it helping people do things differently?
Yeah, absolutely. So we see transformation as not just like an organization or a project, but we are a farmer-led movement, and we're working to build a more just and sustainable food system. So what that looks like in practice is we create models of alternative ways of farming to the contract farming system. We also provide resources that help farmers overcome barriers to exiting factory farming, and that can be financial or access. And then we also work to build solidarity with other movements and to shift the societal narratives to help bring about that cultural change.
That's really beautiful, because I think that can be such a, or feel like such a way to end a conversation, especially before having more knowledge too, when people are like, oh, so you want this industry to end, or did you know this and this? And you're like, no, I don't, but I don't know how to explain how it can be better. And I think transformation is doing a really good job at helping people give that language and showing a model to what that actually looks like in practice, versus just saying we can, I don't know, do it differently.
Yep, absolutely.
So what are some of the projects or maybe conversations you're having with farmers? Is that someone's contacting you and saying, I want out? What does that maybe initial contact look like in this work?
Honestly, again, because the food system is working, the contract system is working exactly the way it's meant to, farmers are looking for a way out for their own reasons. And that can be for economic reasons, specifically within the contract farming system. Farmers tend to get into a debt treadmill when they're working with their contractor or when they're working with their integrator. And so they'll take out loans, they'll get their business started up, but the integrator can continue to require upgrades at risk of losing their contract.
So you're saying that these smaller farmers are contracted out by these big companies to, whether it's chickens, cattle, right? Correct?
Well, so primarily we work with poultry and hog farmers, or chicken and pig farmers. We do use the terms depending on who we're speaking with. But for chicken and hog farmers, it's very similar industries, but especially in poultry farming. So there's what's called vertical integration. And so the integrators control all of the process. And the only thing the farmers really own is the land, the building, the structures, the waste, but also the debt. So the two problematic aspects of that is what is put on the farmer's shoulders. Yeah. Yeah. And so farmers will reach out to us. So that was the main way we see them, is they are wanting to get out of debt. They want to stop the treadmill. And so that was one reason. And then we've also had so farm transitions from generation to generation. We have younger people who are seeing what their parents went through, maybe saw how they've been treated, or saw the debt, or maybe just didn't want to work with the animals because maybe they also had resignations about or concerns about the welfare. And so they want to maybe stay on the farm, but they don't want to continue. So looking for alternative ways to stay on the farm and be profitable, but continue farming. So they'll do the initial contact, and from there we'll schedule an intake call to decide, or just to meet with the farmers and determine if we're a good fit for each other, because we very much, we see this as a partnership with farmers. So not only are we deciding, but the farmers deciding based on what our goals are, what their goals are, if we're a good fit for each other. And so depending on how that goes, then we'll go through and we'll do a needs assessment call. And from that, moving forward, it's looking at creating a farm transition plan, maybe starting to research if we don't already have some that we're working with, consultants for technical consultants, business consultants that we might work with, just to help them get their farm transition plan rolling.
Is there a common crop that is, I suppose it depends on where people are, right? But what are some of those common things that people are switching over to?
Yeah, so primarily a lot of our farmers have looked into specialty mushrooms.
Mm,
And part of that is just because they're a higher value thing that they can grow and sell, but also because they grow pretty quickly. And so again, we do work with the poultry and hog farmers, which have they have very similar structures. So one of the things we really try to do is help farmers repurpose their existing, whatever it is, whether it's their land or their structures. We have conversion plans to help them do that.
mm.
And so we generally have conversion plans for them going to either greenhouses to grow those specialty crops, which are generally like fruits, vegetables, things like that. And or they can convert into something that like they can convert into growing mushrooms. There's very different environmental controls
Yeah.
depending on which one. But the interesting thing is, so for example, we have a poultry farmer in North Carolina, and they actually started their transition before they came to us, but they were poultry farmers, chicken farmers. And they started repurposing some of the feed and the water lines in their barn, because a lot of these are automated with some of those upgrades that they have, being able to repurpose some of those environmental controls as a greenhouse. And
Right.
what they generally have done is they'll just remove, the ceiling and the walls and replace that with some form of greenhouse material.
Wow, that's really cool too, to then be continuing to be able to use some of the equipment and like you said, the structures that already exist versus
Yeah.
being in that. I'm sure that's not always the case with everything, but utilizing that is a bonus, it seems.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the other fun ones. So for specialty mushrooms, a lot of the times what they've done is shipping containers, repurposing old shipping
Mm,
containers, putting those either outside on their property or putting them in a previous poultry barn, and using those as climate controlled spaces to grow mushrooms as well. So that's another way that they're transitioning.
Are you working then mostly with those farmers that are contracted through bigger companies, or are there small town farms or maybe family farms in that way too that are like, I want to do something different even at this scale?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what's really interesting is when we tend to think of small farms or family farms, we do tend to think of the smaller and what's probably grown quite a while ago. But unfortunately, even family farms, when we refer to a family farm, everybody has a family. So that doesn't really say anything about the size of the farm.
Right.
And yeah, all of these factory farms are owned by families, and then they're contracted with the integrator to grow for them into that system.
It has to be so interesting to hear all of these different stories. I'm sure you've got oodles, but do any stories stick out of these transformation stories, or someone you've worked with that you're just like, wow, I'm so glad we were able to help them, work with them, hear their story?
Yeah, what was really interesting was when I started in January of 2023. And 3 weeks into my role, I got a chance to go on site visits in
Oh,
North
wow.
Carolina, where a lot of our farmers that we work with are. So we have farmers, we have one in Iowa and Indiana, we have a handful in North Carolina, we've had some in Georgia, and then also in
Mm,
Texas. But we have a concentration of them in North Carolina. And partly that's because there is a moratorium on factory farms. So when one shuts down, then they can't necessarily be replaced. But we do work with a mixture of farmers who are both former or active. But one of the things that can happen with these farmers is that if their contract is terminated, they may not be able to grow for anybody else. So they might have to move to an off-farm job, not be able to do anything
good
specifically with their
gosh.
barn. Yeah. And so that's been a handful of the farmers that we've worked with, is that they've had their contracts terminated and had to move off farm. And one of the goals that they're working towards is coming back on farm. So
Mm,
there's a couple that we've worked with. One in North Carolina, again, they were the poultry farm. They're the ones that repurposed a little bit on their own before they transitioned into a greenhouse. And they did a little bit before, but then they also joined working with us. And they recently just received one of our research and innovation grants to upgrade, but they were able to do so much on their own, and they were very scrappy and very creative. And it was really, really exciting to see just what they were able to do on their own, but then what we're able to do together. And what they're doing with that pilot project or the grant that we gave them is to upgrade their materials and expand what they're doing, because their goals is also to come back onto the farm. And so I think maybe the husband is on the farm, but I think the wife is still working off farm. And I think they want to be able to both work on the farm together. That one's really exciting. I got to meet them on that tour. And then another farmer, he had his contract terminated as well. And his name's Tom Lim, and he's in North Carolina. And he's a Khmer refugee. And so one of their things is they've just loved growing their own fruits and vegetables and different things that are familiar with them. So they have a lot of I want to say it's like Southeastern Asian vegetables and fruits. And so he grows like jujubes and persimmons and just has like, he's created an oasis in his backyard. And you can see the poultry houses behind that, one of which is being converted into a greenhouse. But his pilot project was starting with specialty mushrooms. And so we've been able to see him scale up. And it's just really exciting to see him be able to come back on the farm. And that's another goal of that family as well, is to come back on the farm and that be their main source of income. So there's so many I could talk about, but the main through line that I saw when I did that tour and got to meet all of these farmers was how much they spoke about hope. And just the fact that they had an alternative, they had something to be working towards, and the hope that they felt being out of that system and being able to be a part of a new system that's beneficial for them. They're growing food for their local communities and getting to connect with their local communities, and just seeing the resilience that's coming out of that. I find that really beautiful.
I mean, and this directly confronts that narrative, right? That every farmer is living their best life down the road with it's like old McDonald is the image we have, right? And this direct contact with folks who are saying, no, I'm actually not okay. And this system confronts that. So what is it that the people in this industry are suffering at the hands of? What are they experiencing that is making them want to get out?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, to anybody if it's not about animals, I don't necessarily I'm not interested. We all do eat. And especially if we're vegan, we want to eat all our fruits and our vegetables and all those things. And somebody's growing those. So it is in our best interest to support farmers across the board. I do want to start with that. But yeah, as I had mentioned, the key factor is for these contract farmers, they are stuck in debt treadmill. And so whenever their integrator is requiring upgrades of them, it's an upgrade or you're going to lose your contract. And again, because of consolidation and also the vertical integration in the industry, that doesn't leave them with very many options. So they don't get a say in how these animals are cared for, what they're fed, if they get to give them access to light or to move around. And I do know also some of the farmers that we've spoken with have talked about, a lot of farmers, they want to grow things. And when in these contract farms, a lot of times because of the concentration and you have all of these animals, I especially think about poultry, they're dying off. And so he would talk about having to walk through and put them out of their misery and doing that multiple times a day for, I don't even know, countless amount of birds. And what that does to a person, I can't even begin to imagine. And so the option and the ability to do something where you're growing food and it's more full of life versus full of having to face that death every day and seeing that's really difficult for them.
I know there's a disconnect from our food and our understanding of where it came from, whether it's a banana or whether it is from an animal. And there's a disconnect across the board, right? Like you said, it's in our best interest to support farmers, regardless of how you're like plant-based or whatever. It is crucial to keep hearing from the people directly affected by these systems. And of course, we know that's everything, but in terms of speaking to farmers and speaking to the trauma that they're exposed to and witnessing, that disconnect, not only from our food system in general, but what it looks like for 99% of the animal agriculture industry, where most of that food is coming from. It's not the local farm everyone has somehow imagined exists close to them that just like actually doesn't. But the mental anguish that our system is putting people through is not to be understated.
Yeah, and I also want to highlight the mental health aspect. Having been an emergency dispatcher and being on the other side of
Yes.
things, and knowing because first responders have a higher rate of, I want to say it's suicide than the general population. And it's the same for farmers. I want to say it's
Yep.
3.5 times. And that can be for numerous reasons. That can be partly maybe the debt that's inherent, especially in the contract farming system. I do know that there are also farmers working in these buildings. Not only the animals can get sick, but it can also infect the humans. You have the ammonia from the litter of the chickens. If you get cuts and scrapes on you, like those can get infected. You can get some diseases that can come in or infections. There is some risk that's part of this, and that can affect your mental health as well. But yeah, just trying to find ways to pay off your debt to stay on your farm. That's the number one thing, is just figuring out how to be a viable business, because that's why these contract farmers are looking to exit, is because they just see the debt continuing to climb and decline. And I do want to say, from the farmers, at least from what I know, from the farmers that have reached out to us, they can have anywhere from a couple $100,000 to over $1 million in debt. So
Jeez.
trying to wrap our minds around that, and then seeing that number continue to climb and you're not able to pay that off, like what does that do to your mental health too? And trying to make sure you can stay on your land and continue doing what you want and what you love.
So I think a lot of times when people think of food systems and that pushback, it's like, if you don't support farmers, if you don't buy this meat or this chicken or whatever, you're not supporting farmers. You have to support farmers. And I think this conversation shows that maybe that's not the best way to support this industry and some of the real people affected. I know there's lots of entryways into different various conversations for folks, but I think vegan or not, there is still so much that people don't know about the food system.
Yeah.
What do you share with people that are like, oh shit, I got to do something. What do I do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the best thing that I could say is a reminder that, yeah, our food system is working exactly the way it was designed to, which is to value profit above all else. It's harming the animals, it's harming ourselves and the environment, and just as importantly, it's harming the farmers and farm workers at the front line of the system, and speaking specifically to the contract farming system. And our best chance at creating a more just and sustainable food system, one that is less oppressive and less violent for everybody, is to include everyone. The best thing you can do is, you can seek common ground and build from it. And again, as a recovering perfectionist, we can seek progress over perfection. And what some of that can look like in practice in regards to how we can support our farmers. We can support our local farmers and farm organizations through farmers markets, through CSAs, and really just, connecting and getting to know our local and our regional farmers. I think that's really important. One of the other things with contract farming is farmers can tend to be isolated and alone. So being able to farmers to connect to other farmers, but also to their community, I think is really important, and hear and feel that support from them. Especially if they don't feel like they're receiving it, if they're a contract farmer, from their integrators when they pull a processing plant, or when they threaten to terminate their contract and they don't have any other options. So getting that support. And the other thing I would say is just to check out the transformationproject.org's website. We have an entire Get Involved page where you can submit through a contact form if you want to offer any of the skills that you have for volunteering, or if you're a food business owner or an academic that wants to partner on some research. So there's ways that you can get involved through that. We're also on social media. I want to say it's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. And so that's one of the best ways to stay up to date. We like to use that to highlight farmer stories, to share opportunities with farmers, to share farmer wins, to share actionable items. So that's also a really great place to just stay in touch and get involved.
I will probably end up saying this in every episode I record from here on out, but just this idea of no movement existing in isolation, and these interlocking systems, these conversations just continue to show me that collective liberation also takes a lot of collective care. And
Yes.
that knowing your local regional farmers and knowing community and finding, like you said, like finding ways to get involved. And I think that is going to be so important. Hey, you have skills that might be able to be utilized to share this message that you already think is really amazing. This hyper individualistic culture in capitalism that we're in makes us think we have to do everything on our own. And like that perfection thing of just, oh, I know about this problem, I better learn how to solve it myself now. And once you
Yeah,
step back, you're like, that's so silly. That's not going to work.
right.
We need each other. And this conversation, I think, just is another way to highlight that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's one of the really important things. So a lot of the work that I do is working through our research and innovation grants. I help with the process when farmers are applying, but also through the reporting of that and helping create the reports. And one of the through lines that we get from farmers that are going through that and doing their pilot projects is that they often say that they wish they had more examples. And especially with the first round that we did when we were like 2022, we had farmers really wishing that they had other farmers to connect to, other examples of how to do this, of what to do. And so one of the things that we really work to do is to connect farmers to each other so that they can see that it's possible, so they don't feel alone, so they don't feel isolated. And especially depending on what they're trying to transition to, but even just to explore whatever options might exist to them and what might fit well for them. And I did want to touch on too, because I don't know that I did, but another thing that we do is we provide resources to farmers to help them overcome those barriers. And a lot of that is the financial. So we work with farmers to enroll them into the program, which helps with technical support and business support. And then we also do those research and innovation projects. And that also helps them get started if they have an idea. And through that work that we do with those farmers one-on-one, because we can't enroll everybody, we do have limited capacity. But what we do is we turn around and we publish those for free and then share those out with farmers. And so trying to just make sure farmers know that these resources are here to share with each other, to use for yourself, and to really help support them in this as an option if that's something they want to pursue.
I'm radically imagining that this work will continue to grow. The work you do will continue to grow, and more work like this, because it just feels like we know the need is there. We know the desire is there. And like you said, just connecting the pieces for some folks can be the impetus to big change.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's really cool too is generally when I tell people about transformation, about what we do, everybody can get involved. Everybody can support their farmers. Everybody has a reason to dislike factory farming and to want to dismantle that. And you don't
True.
have to care
Let's
for all
come
the reasons.
together.
You don't have to care for all of the reasons. You can come to it as an animal rights advocate. You can come to it as a farmer and farm worker rights advocate. It even involves slaughterhouse workers because that's part of the system, from the environmental movement and rural communities. Because when we think about these concentrated animal feeding operations, also known as factory farms, not only are they producing animals for our food system, but they're producing waste. What does that waste do? It's polluting the communities that those farms are in. And a lot of times outside of the farmers that live and work on them, the communities that those are located towards, especially, I know this is very true in North Carolina specifically, but these rural communities are the most impacted, and they are generally low socioeconomic and sometimes or communities of color. And you can bet that those farms wouldn't be there if it was a mansion or something sitting there, because it's going to harm your property value. It's going to harm your quality of life, being able to be outdoors. Even where I'm at, I'm not entirely near any factory farms. There are some, but I'm not immediately near it, and I can still smell it. And so imagine being right next to one. And yeah, like it impacts everybody, and everybody has a reason or can find a reason to care about this.
And again, those interlocking systems that I just feel like we cannot highlight enough, truly, of, okay, so these places wouldn't exist in these neighborhoods, but they do exist in low socioeconomic people of color's neighborhoods. And that's a part of the system.
Yep. Yeah. And what's even worse, in some states, they don't have to treat the animal waste, so they can just spray it on the nearby fields. And that can also end up in their houses, on their houses, in them. And really affecting their quality of life and their health.
It sounds like a horror movie. That sounds like something that happens in a scary movie as a part of the plot. That every time I hear that, I'm just flabbergasted that's real.
Yeah, absolutely. It's horrifying.
And just the legality of the system, right?
Mhm.
Some of that pushback too is you can't legally harm an animal. You want to bet the legal
Right.
allowances for factory farming, the legal allowances for spraying shit on people's houses and fields, those are
Mhm.
legal actions. So just talking about legality doesn't really cut it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Is there anything else that you wanted to share with listeners that I haven't given you space to do?
Maybe we touched on this, but I would say the connection between our personal well-being and our planet's health is our food system.
Mm.
Our planet thrives on biodiversity, and similarly, humans thrive on diversity, whether that's in our communities, our lived experiences, or in what we eat. And I think this really reflects our current food system, but I love this question is how are we able to feed 80 billion animals, but not 8 billion people? I think that's a really important question. And I also just want to draw attention to a couple of things under our current food system. Factory farming and the feed that we grow for these animals, which is known as monocropping, those are top contributors to our greenhouse gas emissions, to climate change, and our biodiversity loss. When we think about land use, half the world's habitable land is used for agriculture, with most of this used to raise for livestock for meat and dairy. But noting that it takes 100 times more land to produce the kilocalorie of beef compared to plant-based alternatives. And the same goes for protein. It takes 100 times more land to produce a gram of protein comparing beef to peas or tofu. I think that's really important. And then I know we touched on waste a little bit too, but I thought this stat was, I want to say impressive, but also very concerning. The Food and Water Watch's analysis of the USDA's 2022 Census of Agriculture data, which just came out this year, they found that there were 24,000 US factory farms, and they were producing 940 billion pounds of manure annually. And just to get an idea of how much that is, twice as much sewage as is produced by our entire US population,
Oh
which
my
is wild.
gosh.
Yes.
Why
Yeah.
is
And
that perspective so wild?
it's
Oh.
wild, the amount of waste produced. And to keep in mind, on top of that, this is not treated like human waste. And so
Mm.
it's environmental and a human health hazard, and it gets into our waterways, pollutes our air, and degrades our soil. And then last but not least, our water. So the way that we use our water, meat production requires more water than growing fruits and vegetables and grains. And for comparison, on average, it takes about 520 gallons of water to produce a pound of chicken meat versus something like strawberries takes about 50 gallons per pound. And so we know that our current food system is harming the planet's health, but what about human health and our personal well-being? And I really think that we can work more to eat the rainbow and
Mm.
increase the diversity of our plants in our diet. Even if you can't go 100%, just continuing to increase the diversity and eating as many plants as possible. We know that supports our gut microbiome and supports our overall health as humans. And what I really love is that if we were to shift to eating to a predominantly plant-based diet, not only would our population as a whole be healthier, but we would also reduce our global land use for agriculture by 75%. Yeah.
It's
And then what do we do with that land, right? If we freed this land from this agricultural use, that would not only eliminate the pollution and the waste produced in the first place, but it would also provide us opportunities to help reclaim our soil health and pollinator health, our air and water quality and safety, and also help us offset emissions. I thought that was really important.
I'm so glad that you brought that up. I'm sorry I didn't come back to that one directly and we cruised around it because I think that again is just the highlight between that connection is so important. And that's what really always continues to drive it home for me. And even in those moments where it gets hard to just be like, okay, taking care of myself and making this choice right now is connected to everything. And yes, that can be overwhelming, but I think it can be really empowering.
Oh man, yeah, I definitely can get overwhelmed by, especially social media. We're so well informed
Oh,
about how many problems there are in the world. And that's really been a process for me to work on too. The best thing that I've come up with is that I really just curated my lifestyle and my habits to support the change I want to see in the world. And when things feel tough, I just remind myself that like at my baseline, like that is creating and fighting for change, even if I can't do
mhm.
anything. And if I can, it's just a bonus to go above and beyond that.
It's a good perspective to hold on to because it is the long haul. We're in it for the long haul.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have any practices that you rely on to take care of yourself in this work? Because it's a lot to exist in 2024, end of sentence. But doing this
Yeah.
work and being confronted with the
Mhm.
reality, right? You're looking at the reality of systems that are just abhorrent. And also, when you look at some of the slaughterhouse footage, the earthlings, the olive, that's really traumatic. And not that you're watching that every day, but when you're involved in the work, how do you manage that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not gonna lie, I'm still working on how to cope with my previous job and fallout from that. But I will say, as a dispatcher, but I will say,
Mm.
I think what I find so much at this is there's so much hope to be found. So really trying to see the hope and celebrating the wins. I know our team is really big on, especially and with farmers too. One of our farmers recently, she got in Indiana, she got her home-based vendor certification, which was a huge obstacle that she wasn't quite expecting. And like, taking time to celebrate those wins and remind them to
Yes.
do that. But also doing that for ourselves. So working to celebrate those wins. But quite honestly, one of the main practices that I try to do is I try to move my body, whether and ideally outdoors, because being in the Midwest, you have a limited window of when it's comfortable to be outside.
Ooh, I
Um,
heard that. I'm in northern
yeah.
Minnesota.
Yes. So trying to get outside when I can, as often as I can. And honestly, I'm a big proponent and I need to be better about it. But I try to get off my phone and also at times delete social media because that can be really overwhelming for me because I'm somebody who wants to do all of the things, cares about all of the things, and that can really make me feel like I'm not doing enough. When in reality, in my personal life, I do so much. And then this is also my job. So I'm like, you're doing more than enough. It's okay to remove yourself from that. And that's something I'm really working on as a practice. Yeah, that's probably the best self-care I can offer is if you feel like your mental health is really suffering and you're finding yourself on your phone a lot like me, get off of it. And that has always been really, really helpful.
Okay, I feel like you're screaming at me with this advice. I'm
At
like,
myself as
I
well. At
get it,
myself as well.
Megan. I need to be on my phone less. It's truly, though, it is a constant negotiation of that boundary, right? And it's so easy to justify when you're like, but it's my job to be on social media. So I should be on here. And you're like, but for an hour, should you? So it's a constant negotiation.
Yeah, absolutely. I am so guilty of it too. I'll delete it and get right back on it. And I'm like, this is not a great relationship and we need to work on this relationship here.
Or having I had a timer for a while that was like, you've been on
Mm.
here for this many minutes. Do you need a break? And I turned it off because I would go live weekly and it would pop up during that and it'd piss me off. But now I'm just like, no, you just turned it off.
Oh man, that's a step better than I've gotten. I haven't done any of the timers yet. Normally it's a gauge of, oh, my mental health doesn't feel good. What have I been doing? Oh, yeah, there's a connection there.
Hey, awareness, you got to start somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining me. This was really lovely. And I know that listeners are going to learn a lot and want to check out Mercy for Animals and the Transformation Project.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so glad I got to do this. So thank you.
If you're hearing this message, you've listened to the entire episode of Consciously Clueless. And for that, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, tag me when you share in social media, or share this episode with others who may be interested in the topic. Any sharing truly means the world to me. Join the community at patreon.com/consciouslycarly for bonus podcast content like smoke sessions with Consciously Cannabis guests, video versions of solo episodes, monthly live calls, one-to-one support, more lifestyle content, mindfulness resources, and more. Until next time, stay consciously clueless.